When a widow with 4 children appears at the doorstep of a solitary rancher, she brings not only hunger and exhaustion, but a secret worth killing for. Soon, armed men begin to gather near the ranch, the dust beneath their hooves a warning of the siege to come. And in the heart of the prairie, a man who had long forgotten what family means must decide what truth is worth and who he's willing to protect. The wind spoke louder than any man on Dry Creek Ridge, and Tobias Granger liked it that way. For 10 years his ranch had known no other voices. No visitors, no family, no cries of children or laughter at supper, just the rustle of prairie grass and the groan of his aging fence lines. He woke with the sun, spoke to his horses, and buried the rest of his words deep with the ones he had lost. It was a Tuesday morning when the silence broke. At first, he thought it was a mirage, a plume of dust rising on the western trail, far beyond the cottonwoods that marked his outer pasture. But then came the clatter of hooves and the creak of a wagon axle. Tobias squinted beneath the brim of his hat, heart hitching for reasons he couldn't explain. A wagon rolled slowly over the rise, its canvas sides sun-faded and patched. Leading it was a woman, slender, dark-haired, bonnet tilted from the wind. Behind her 4 children, each worn thin by the road. Dust covered their clothes and faces, but not their eyes. No, their eyes still searched the land like they hoped it might give them something back. Tobias stepped down from his porch, hand resting casually on the Colt at his hip. He didn't draw. It wasn't that kind of moment. But a man who'd lived alone for a decade didn't survive without caution. The wagon came to a stop 20 feet from his gate. The woman climbed down slowly, legs stiff from days on the trail. "Sir," she said, voice cracked from thirst, "I'm sorry to trouble you. My name is Mary Beth Mercer. These are my children. We need water, and maybe just a place to rest for a night." Tobias didn't answer right away. His eyes swept over the children. 2 boys, 2 girls, none older than 12. Their faces were sunburnt and tired. One little girl held a doll with no arms. The youngest boy had no shoes. He could have said no, should have, perhaps, but something deep in his chest, something buried but not gone, stirred. The wind paused, as if waiting on his reply. "Water's in the trough," he said, "and there's shade out back. I'll fetch some bread." And just like that, the silence of 10 years cracked like old leather, and something new stepped in. Tobias hadn't shared a meal with another soul in nearly a decade. The table inside his cabin bore the marks of age, scratches, burned rings, a corner once gnawed by a bored hound long gone. He cleared the dust off with the edge of his sleeve, trying not to think too hard about what he was doing. Out back, Mary Beth and the children sat in the shade of his barn, drinking from the tin cups he'd filled from the pump. The smallest girl clutched her mother's skirt with one hand and the bread he'd offered in the other, eyes never leaving Tobias as he moved between cabin and barn. She watched him like a deer might watch a wolf, not yet running, but not trusting. "I didn't mean to startle you," Mary Beth said softly when he passed her another loaf. "We've been traveling near a week. We came up from San Angelo, thought we might find a friendly place to rest. I suppose that was too much to ask." Tobias didn't respond right away. He studied the worn leather of her boots, the fraying hem of her dress, the way her voice held strength beneath exhaustion. "You're traveling without a man," he said finally. It wasn't a question. "My husband," she said, voice flat, "died in the Brazos ambush 2 months back. Cavalry said it was a mistake. That's what they always say when good men don't come home." The eldest boy, barely 12, stood a little straighter at her words. His eyes flicked to Tobias, defiant, protective. "Name's Will," Mary Beth added, seeing the tension. "He's the man of the family now." Tobias gave the boy a small nod, one man to another. "You folks can stay the night," he said gruffly. "But come morning, I reckon you'll want to be moving on." Something in Mary Beth's eyes faltered. Not disappointment, just quiet resignation. She'd heard it before. But as the sky turned gold behind the hills and the children dozed off in the straw, Tobias sat on his porch, boots on the rail, and couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't just another passing storm. Something had shifted. And it wasn't done shifting yet. Morning came with a red sky, a color that old ranchers used to call rider's blood. Tobias stood at the edge of his porch, coffee in hand, watching the sun rise through the haze. The silence had returned, but it felt different now, like a breath held too long. Behind him, Marybeth was stirring the children from their sleep in the barn. He heard soft voices, rustling straw, a cough from the youngest. The kind of sounds a house hadn't known in 10 long years. But peace never sat long in Texas. Around mid-morning, hooves thundered down the trail, kicking up dust like a dust devil gone mean. Tobias's hand found his rifle instinctively. From the ridge came a single rider, lean, sharp-faced, with a black hat low over narrow eyes. "Cyrus Maddox," Tobias muttered, watching him descend the slope. Cyrus pulled up hard at the gate and tipped his hat with the kind of smirk that never reached his eyes. "Heard you got company, Granger," he said, eyes scanning the yard. "Strangers. A woman with young'uns, that right?" Tobias didn't answer, just sipped his coffee and let the silence stretch. Cyrus shifted in the saddle, impatient. "You know the kind of trouble that trails a widow these days. I'd keep an eye on her if I were you. Word is, she's running from more than bad luck." "Word from who?" Tobias asked flatly. Cyrus's grin widened. "Folks who seen her man die, and folks who say she left that town mighty fast with something she wasn't supposed to have." Tobias stepped off the porch, rifle still resting in his hand. Not threatening, but not friendly either. "She's got 4 hungry kids and a broken wagon. That's all I've seen." Cyrus leaned down in the saddle, voice lowering. "Watch your back, Granger. Not everyone comes to your door looking for kindness. Some come to see what they can take when your guard's down." With that, he wheeled his horse and rode off, trailing dust and suspicion behind him. Tobias stood there long after he'd gone, the sun high and hot now, and for the first time since they'd arrived, he wondered if he'd let something dangerous into his home. Or if danger was chasing something innocent straight to his doorstep. That night, the ranch was quiet, but not the peaceful kind. It was the hush that comes when something's unsettled, when even the wind seems to hold its breath. Tobias lit the oil lamp and set a pot of beans to simmer. Marybeth sat near the hearth, mending one of her boys' shirts with nimble, tired fingers. The children, freshly washed from the pump, played silently with scraps of wood and corn husks. Tobias hadn't meant to let them in the house, but the barn was cooling too fast, and one of the girls had started coughing. "You keep a tidy home," Marybeth said, looking up from her stitching. Tobias grunted. "Only got one man's mess to clean. Not hard." "You live here alone?" He didn't answer right away, just stirred the beans. 10 years. Marybeth nodded, eyes lingering on the worn photograph on the mantel. Faded now, but still visible. A woman, smiling gently, and a little boy with a crooked grin, frozen forever in better days. "She was beautiful," Marybeth said softly. Tobias didn't speak. He just ladled stew into bowls, passing them out without another word. The children devoured the meal like it was a feast, thank yous, mumbled between bites. Marybeth ate slower, glancing at Tobias like she wanted to ask something more. Finally, she set her bowl aside. "Mr. Granger, if we found work nearby, I could pay you to stay a few more nights. Help around the ranch. Will can pull his weight too. We won't be a burden." Tobias looked at her. The firelight caught the shadows beneath her eyes, the strain in her posture, the silent strength of a woman too proud to beg but too tired to keep running. He wanted to say no. He should say no. But what came out was something else entirely. "We'll talk in the morning." Outside, the coyotes began to howl from the far hills. And Tobias, for the first time in years, didn't feel quite so ready to sleep alone. Morning came crisp and gold, the kind of dawn that whispered promises through frost-kissed grass and made even the hardest days feel like they might go right, at least for a while. Tobias stepped outside to find Will already splitting kindling near the smokehouse, sleeves rolled and jaw set, with the kind of quiet purpose most boys didn't find until manhood. Marybeth was drawing water, her girls hanging laundry nearby. The smallest boy, Jamie she'd called him, chased chickens with a crooked stick and a shriek of laughter. It should have been peaceful. But then Tobias noticed it. His smokehouse door hung slightly open. He hadn't been in there since the last cold front, and he always latched it tight. He strode over, boots crunching frost. Inside, the meat still hung from the beams, jerky and slabs of bacon untouched. But something else was wrong. A footprint in the dirt, too large for any of the children. And near the far wall, something had been moved. His hidden rifle, knocked over behind the salt barrels. Tobias crouched, heart tightening. Someone had been here. Not long ago. He emerged slowly, scanning the tree line beyond the fence. Nothing moved. Just prairie and cold wind. But that gnawing feeling in his gut, same one that had saved his life more times than he cared to count, tightened. He walked back toward the house, Will watching him with raised brows. "That's your rifle?" the boy asked, nodding at the gun in Tobias's hand. Tobias gave a short nod. "Thought I heard coyotes last night. Probably nothing." But even as he said it, his hand gripped the stock tighter. Because if someone had come that close, snooping in his smokehouse, they hadn't just stumbled onto the ranch by chance, they'd come looking for something. Or someone. And that meant the quiet days were numbered. By midday, the frost had melted, leaving the yard soft and damp. Tobias walked the perimeter of the ranch with the slow, measured gait of a man hunting ghosts. He didn't tell Mary Beth or the children. No sense spooking them if it really was just a drifter with more hunger than sense. But deep down, he knew better. Near the south fence, he found what he was looking for: tracks. 2 sets, maybe 3. One barefoot, small enough to be a child. The other was booted, wide-heeled. Military issue, maybe. But scuffed and worn in a way that said law had nothing to do with the man wearing them. Tobias crouched beside them, running a hand through his beard. Whoever had been here, they'd come from the bluffs and circled wide before reaching the smokehouse. Smart, careful, watching. Back at the barn, Mary Beth was hanging saddle blankets on the rail to dry. She saw his face as he approached and went still. "You found something," she said, not asking. Tobias nodded. Tracks near the fence line. Not fresh, but not old either. Someone's watching this place. Mary Beth's knuckles whitened around the fabric in her hands. Tobias stepped closer, lowering his voice. "That man of yours, he'd die in a clean fight?" She looked at him for a long moment, then away. "No, it wasn't clean. They set on him while we slept. No warning, no reason we could understand. Took his rifle, his boots, even his wedding ring. Left me with 4 children and a fire burning in the trees." Tobias didn't press, but the silence between them said enough. "I think they're following you," he said. "That man yesterday, Cyrus Maddox, he wasn't just making neighborly visits. He's sniffing around." Mary Beth straightened. "If you want us gone, say so." But Tobias shook his head. "I'm not sending kids out into God knows what. But I need the truth, Mary Beth. If someone's coming, I gotta know what they're willing to kill for." She hesitated, glanced toward the children, then back at him. "There's something they want," she whispered. "And it ain't gold." That night, after the children had drifted into slumber and the wind rattled loose shingles on the barn, Mary Beth came to Tobias with a small bundle wrapped in flannel. She held it like a newborn, tender, cautious, protective. "This," she said, setting it on his table, "is what they're after." Tobias unfolded the cloth. Inside were a handful of papers, creased, weather-worn, some water-stained. But the names on the headers caught his eye immediately. U.S. Cavalry, Fort Brazos Command, Colonel Silas Mercer. He looked up sharply. "These are Army dispatches." "Official copies," Mary Beth nodded. "My husband wasn't just a scout, he kept records. He had a head for detail. Said if something happened to him, I'd know who to blame. And they couldn't bury it." Tobias read through one letter, then another. His jaw clenched tighter with every line. These weren't reports. They were accounts of raids that were never logged, of orders that sent men into Apache villages under false pretense, of gold shipments diverted into private hands. One letter mentioned a Cyrus Maddox by name, mercenary turned liaison, hired to silence witnesses. "This is a hanging offense," Tobias muttered, "for anyone tied to this." Mary Beth's eyes gleamed in the lamplight. "That's why they killed my husband. He was going to turn it over to a judge in Abilene." Tobias leaned back in his chair, the weight of what she'd brought settling over him like a saddle made of iron. "You've been running with this the whole time?" She nodded. 3 towns in 6 weeks. Every time I thought we were safe, someone came sniffing around. I buried the letters once, but I couldn't leave them. Not after what they did. Tobias stared at the bundle for a long moment, then folded the cloth over again. "You can't keep running, and you sure as hell can't stay here much longer." "I didn't ask for protection," Mary Beth said, lifting her chin. "No," Tobias said softly, "but your kids didn't ask to be hunted either." Outside, a coyote howled, closer than the night before, and Tobias knew the clock had started ticking. Tobias barely slept that night. He sat by the window with his rifle resting across his lap, watching the tree line as if it might blink. The fire burned low, casting long shadows on the log walls, and every gust of wind felt like footfalls. At dawn the knock came. Not the light tap of a neighbor, not the desperate pounding of the desperate. This was measured. 3 sharp raps, evenly spaced. Tobias rose slowly, eyes narrowing. Mary Beth emerged from the back room, children still curled in blankets behind her. She didn't speak, but her pale face said enough. Tobias opened the door with the rifle in plain sight. Cyrus Maddox stood there, flanked by 2 men Tobias didn't recognize. Rough-looking types, armed, their coats open just enough to show the pistols beneath. "Mornin', Granger," Cyrus drawled. "Thought I'd stop by again. Had a notion I might have been too hasty yesterday." Tobias stepped out onto the porch, closing the door behind him. "You always bring back up for an apology?" Cyrus smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Just good company for an early ride. We were looking for a family we heard passed through Hiko. Said they had a woman and 4 kids. You wouldn't happen to have seen 'em, would you?" Tobias said nothing. Cyrus took a slow step closer. "See? Thing is that family. Word is, they're harboring federal documents. Stolen ones, and the Army don't take kindly to that sort of thing." "I reckon you're not the Army," Tobias said, voice flat. Cyrus's grin twitched. "Well, you're right, but I do work for folks who pay better than the government. And those folks are mighty eager to see this little complication wrapped up quiet." Tobias didn't move, didn't blink. "Ain't no one here but me. But you keep sniffing around my land, and you might find something you weren't looking for." The tension hung thick in the morning air. Cyrus stared at him for a beat, then tipped his hat. "Suit yourself, Granger, but sooner or later, we'll find what we came for." As they rode off, Tobias didn't watch them go. He just turned and re-entered the cabin. Mary Beth stood there, arms wrapped tight across her chest. "They're not gonna stop," she said. "No," Tobias replied, "but neither am I." Tobias pulled the oilskin bundle from under the floorboards that night. He hadn't touched it in nearly a decade, not since the day he'd buried his wife and son. Inside lay maps, a revolver he hadn't drawn in years, a small pouch of coin, and a badge he no longer wore, U.S. Marshal, cracked down the middle. Mary Beth sat across the room, watching him with quiet intensity. "You were law," she said, not quite a question. "Was," Tobias answered. "Till the war took my boy, and a fire took the rest." Mary Beth nodded slowly. "Then you know what happens if those papers reach the right hands." "I do," Tobias said. "And I know what happens if they don't." He laid out the map on the table. "Abilene's 3 days by horse, 2 if the trail holds dry. There's a judge there, Franklin Cordwin. He's clean, quiet, but not afraid to use a rope if the law's on his side." Mary Beth stepped forward. "You think he'll take the risk?" "I think," Tobias said, tapping the map, "if I ride fast and quiet, I can get these letters to him before Cyrus and his boys sniff it out. What about us? You'll stay here, Tobias said. Keep the children safe. I've got traps in the hills and hidden rifles along the north ridge. If they come before I'm back, hold the house. But don't go looking for trouble. Mary Beth's jaw set. I won't let them take this from me, not again. Tobias met her gaze. Something passed between them in that moment. Unspoken, forged in fire and grief. Not romance. Not yet. But something older. Stronger. Then we fight smart, he said. Outside, the wind picked up again, whistling through the cracks like it was trying to warn them. In the distance, far off, a single coyote cried out. Tobias rolled the badge back into the oilskin, tucked it in his coat, and holstered the revolver at his side. He was riding at first light, and if Cyrus Maddox meant to stop him, he'd have to go through the old lawman who'd buried his badge, but never forgot how to use it. Before the sun even touched the peaks, Tobias was already saddled up and riding out. The horse beneath him, Dusty, was old but sure-footed, and he knew the back trails like the veins on Tobias's weathered hands. He'd avoided the main road, veering into scrub brush and dry creek beds, cutting north where the land dipped into a stretch of territory locals called Ash Trail, named for a fire that had once burned a dozen families out of their homesteads. It was dangerous terrain, steep, narrow in parts, and thick with places for men to hide. But it was also faster, and less watched. The letters were tucked inside his coat, just over his heart. Tobias's eyes scanned every ridge and bluff, his instincts prickling. He wasn't a young man anymore, but the years hadn't dulled the part of him that knew when danger was close. And somewhere in that red rock and dry juniper, he felt it. Around midday, as he approached the halfway point, a bullet cracked through the air. Not close, but not far enough to ignore. It struck the dirt to his left, kicked up a plume, and then came another, whistling past his hat. Tobias wheeled Dusty hard and dove behind a boulder. He didn't need to see their faces to know who sent the greeting. Cyrus's men were already on his trail. He waited, counting heartbeats, listening. Then, silence. They weren't charging. They were waiting for him to make the next move. He pulled his rifle from the saddle holster and moved low and fast across the rocks, circling around the hill. If they thought he'd come screaming over the ridge, they didn't know Tobias Granger. And that would be their first mistake. As he reached a perch above the trail, he spotted them. Two of them, crouched with rifles aimed at the road below. One smoked a cheroot, lazy and sure of himself. The other scanned the trail, nervous. Tobias took aim. Not to kill. He hadn't come to shed blood unless forced, but a warning would do. He fired once, the shot slamming into the rock between them. Both men scrambled, ducking for cover. Tobias shouted down the ridge, his voice carrying like a thunderclap. You tell Cyrus Maddox, I ride under law again, and I'm bringing hell with me. He didn't wait for their reply. By sundown, he was gone from the Ash Trail and bound for Abilene. Back at the ranch, the wind had turned mean. Mary Beth stood by the porch, eyes locked on the distant hills. The children were inside, quiet for once, as if they too felt the weight in the air. Something was coming. She could feel it the way some folks feel a storm before it breaks. Will had taken to patrolling the perimeter with Tobias's old shotgun, the barrel near dragging on the ground, but his grip was steady. Mary Beth watched him with pride and worry all tangled together. He was becoming a man too fast. That evening, just as the sun slipped behind the bluffs, a horse's cry echoed from the ridge. Not Tobias. Too soon. Too frantic. She grabbed the spyglass Tobias kept near the porch rail and trained it on the far tree line. There, 3 riders, moving slow, cautious, but bold enough to make themselves visible. Cyrus Maddox and 2 of his men. They didn't approach, just lingered, watching. Mary Beth stepped off the porch and walked to the fence line. She didn't raise a weapon, didn't call out. Cyrus tipped his hat from the saddle. "Evening, Mrs. Mercer," he shouted, voice smug. "Heard your lawman ran off into the hills. thought we might come keep you company a while." Mary Beth said nothing. She just turned and walked back to the house. She bolted the door, checked the shutters, and loaded the rifle Tobias had left by the hearth. Will stood near the window. "They're not gonna wait long, are they?" "No," she said, voice calm. "Men like Cyrus don't have patience. They take what they want or burn it down trying." The wind howled through the chimney, and in the gathering dark, Mary Beth Mercer prepared to defend her children, not with fear, but with fire in her blood. Because Tobias had gone to fight the law's battle, but she was ready to fight for her home. Night fell heavy, black as coal tar. Inside the cabin, every board groaned like it knew what was coming. Mary Beth sat with her rifle across her lap, lantern turned low. Will stood by the front window, while the younger children huddled near the hearth, blanketed but restless. Outside, silence. Then, a whistle, short, sharp, followed by hoofbeats circling behind the barn. Mary Beth rose slowly, motioning Will to stay low. She moved to the back window, lifted a corner of the curtain. Torchlight. 2 men creeping along the fence line, one with a kerosene bottle, the other with a match already struck. They were going to burn them out. "Will," she whispered, "get the bucket, soak the blankets. If they light the barn, it could spread." He nodded, darting into action. Mary Beth opened the back door just enough to level her rifle through the gap. Her breathing slowed. Her finger found the trigger. She waited until the flame touched the barn wall, then fired. The shot rang out like thunder, striking the bottle mid-swing. It burst into a flash, igniting one man's sleeve. He howled and tumbled backward, his partner abandoning him and sprinting for the brush. Mary Beth didn't celebrate. She closed the door, bolted it fast. That shot had done more than stop a fire. It had lit the fuse. Minutes later came the real assault. Gunshots cracked against the cabin's side. A window shattered near the children. Will ducked low and shouted, "They're coming from the west fence too." Mary Beth dropped to her knees, grabbed the children, and herded them toward the crawl space beneath the floorboards. Tobias's old root cellar hatch. "Stay there. No sound," she said, her voice like stone. She kissed each of them, once, then closed the hatch. She turned back to the door and lifted the rifle again, just as the front latch shuddered under the first hard kick. Mary Beth Mercer stood alone. No lawman in sight, no cavalry near. But she was no one's victim, and if they wanted the fire, she'd give them one to remember. The front door buckled under the second kick. Mary Beth raised the rifle, braced tight against her shoulder, breath even. She wasn't aiming to scare, she was aiming to stop. With a crash, the door burst inward, and the first man through never made it more than 2 steps. The shot caught him square in the chest, hurling him backward into the dirt. The second froze in the doorway, eyes wide, before diving behind the porch rail. Return fire ripped through the cabin wall, splintering timber and sending plaster dust raining from the rafters. Mary Beth moved fast, grabbing Tobias's second rifle from above the mantel, already loaded. Her hands shook, not from fear but rage held too long. Every inch of her being burned with memory, of nights running, of her husband's blood on dry grass, of whispers behind her in every town. No more. She crawled low to the back room, flung open the window, and fired into the shadows near the barn. A yelp told her she'd hit flesh. Another figure scrambled away, firing wildly. Inside, Will called from beneath the floorboards, "Ma, are you okay?" "Stay down," she shouted. "They're trying to flank us." Suddenly, firelight bloomed outside. Not from a torch. This was bigger. The barn roof, dry from the summer drought, had caught. Smoke began to drift through the cracks of the window frames. The flames danced loud and red across the sky. Mary Beth backed into the main room, coughing. She could hear the men shouting outside, some celebrating, some unsure. They thought fire would break her. They didn't know Mary Beth Mercer. She grabbed the water barrel, dragged it to the door, and soaked what blankets she had. She stuffed one under the door to hold the smoke at bay. Another she threw over the root cellar hatch. They would not burn tonight, not unless she went down with them. Outside, the fire roared. Inside, Mary Beth stood alone, smoke rising, rifle ready, and her voice cut through the chaos like iron. "You want what I've got?" she shouted into the dark. "Then come take it." The barn collapsed in on itself just after midnight, timbers crashing with a scream of sparks and cinders. The fire cast long shadows across the yard, silhouettes of men crouching, hiding, planning, but none dared rush the cabin again. Not yet. Mary Beth paced inside, rifle in hand, eyes scanning every window. Smoke curled around the ceiling, but the blankets held. She'd opened the root cellar hatch for air, letting the children breathe, letting Will pass up the small pistol Tobias had left for emergencies. The boy's eyes were calm, too calm for someone so young. "Mary Beth," he whispered, "they're waiting for dawn." She nodded. That's when cowards charge, when they think light makes them righteous. Then, hoofbeats. Not a charge, not fast. A lone horse moving through smoke and flame, slow and deliberate. Mary Beth moved to the window, her heart kicked. Cyrus Maddox. He rode alone across the yard, hat tilted low, reins loose in one hand, a torch in the other. Behind him, his men waited in the shadows. He dismounted near the porch, tied his horse to the post like he owned the place. "Mary Beth," he called, "that was a hell of a shot you took earlier. Didn't know you had it in you." She didn't answer. He walked up the steps, casually, like calling on a neighbor. "I ain't here to shoot you." "Not yet," he continued. "I'm here to make a deal. You hand over those papers, and you and the kids walk out of here free." "That's my word." Mary Beth laughed, one dry sound in the smoke. "Your word means less than the ashes you left on my land." Cyrus's voice hardened. "You think Tobias Granger is going to save you? He's probably dead in a ditch, same as your husband. You keep this up, you'll be next." Inside, Will gripped the pistol tighter. But Mary Beth didn't shake. She stepped to the door, yanked it open, and faced Cyrus through the rising smoke. "You want what's mine? You come through me." Cyrus's smirk faltered for the first time. He dropped the torch. And as the flames flared brighter across the ranch, so did the war that was about to begin. The moment Cyrus dropped the torch, everything ignited. Men burst from the shadows, rifles raised, boots pounding across scorched earth. Gunshots cracked through the smoky, dark, sharp, hungry sounds that tore through timber and silence alike. Mary Beth dropped to one knee and fired twice into the porch. One man screamed and tumbled backward off the steps. Another kept coming, reaching the door. But Will, crouched behind the hearth, squeezed the trigger on Tobias's pistol. The blast kicked harder than he expected, but the shot found its mark. The attacker crumpled, knocking the door halfway shut behind him. Mary Beth slammed it the rest of the way closed, throwing the bolt. "They're coming from both sides," Will shouted. "I see 'em," Mary Beth answered, sliding toward the window. Through the smoke-choked glass, she spotted a shadow creeping toward the side of the cabin. She fired once, missed, fired again. The figure fell, dropped his rifle, and lay still in the dirt. But then a voice rose up from behind the barn ruins. Cyrus's. "Enough games, Mary Beth," he roared. "You're outnumbered. You're tired. Give us the letters, and this ends now. Keep fighting, and your boy's next." Mary Beth's hands trembled. Her body ached. The rifle was nearly out of rounds. Then, movement. From the east trail, over the rise, another rider. Fast. Familiar. Dust clouded beneath galloping hooves as Tobias Granger charged into the yard, his coat flaring behind him, rifle drawn, horse kicking ash with every stride. He didn't slow. He didn't speak. He just raised his weapon and fired. Cyrus's man near the well spun, dropped. Another ran for cover. Too slow. Tobias rode straight into the firelight like some legend from a half-remembered story, yelling one word. "Down!" Mary Beth and Will dropped to the floor just as a thunderous crack echoed from the yard. Tobias had brought more than bullets. he brought justice. And justice, that night, came roaring back to Dry Creek Ridge. Tobias didn't dismount. He rode through the hail of bullets like a man who'd already made peace with death. Every shot he fired found its mark. 2 more of Cyrus's men fell before they even realized he was among them. Inside the cabin, Marybeth threw open the door and fired at a shape running past. Tobias reined his horse hard and slid to a stop beside her. "You all right?" he barked. "Still breathing," she answered. "Barely." He handed her a fresh rifle from his saddle. "Use this. Yours is near dry." Will popped up from the window ledge and fired toward the barn ruins. "They're pulling back." "Good," Tobias growled, dismounting at last. "Now we push." He moved like a man reborn, every motion practiced, ruthless, righteous. His eyes scanned for Cyrus, but the coward had already vanished into the shadows. Tobias took position near the porch post. "They'll regroup. He'll wait till he thinks we're spent." Marybeth knelt beside him. "We're not spent." Tobias gave her a look, brief but burning. "No, you're not." A shape moved near the corral, one of Cyrus's men, trying to flank. Tobias raised his rifle, but before he could shoot, a crack rang out from inside the cabin. "Will." The man dropped. Cold. Tobias whistled low. "That boy's got a future." Marybeth smiled grimly. "He's got his father's aim." More gunfire lit the far ridge. The last of Cyrus's men were pulling back, but not fleeing. No, they were buying time. Tobias knew what that meant. Cyrus had gone for reinforcements. "I saw more riders," Tobias said, wading down the trail. 10 maybe, 15. Marybeth's breath caught. "How long?" "An hour. Maybe less." They locked eyes, the truth settling between them. One battle had ended, but the war was only just beginning. And by morning, the ranch would either stand or become nothing but ashes and legend. The wind had shifted again, cooler now, with the first breath of dawn stirring in the east. The air smelled of scorched timber, gunpowder, and something deeper: resolve. Tobias and Marybeth worked quickly, laying fresh powder lines between fence posts and buckets of pitch near the porch. "You ever use fire to fight fire?" Tobias asked. "I've used whatever kept my children breathing," Marybeth answered, wrapping bandages around Will's scraped knuckles. The boy didn't flinch. "Let 'em come," he muttered. "We've got more than bullets now." Tobias smiled, grim, proud. "He's right. They expect us tired, weak. That's when we strike hardest." They stashed the children in the root cellar again, this time with food, water, and instructions to wait for 3 knocks. No more, no less. The look Marybeth gave them before sealing the hatch nearly shattered her. But she stood tall. She was the ridge now, strong, unmoving. Then came the sound, faint, distant thunder, hoofbeats, many. Tobias climbed to the ridge behind the barn with his spyglass. What he saw made his blood run cold and hot all at once. 15 riders, armed, determined, and Cyrus Maddox at their head. He returned to the cabin and looked Marybeth in the eye. "They'll be here in 10 minutes. We hold them at the mouth of the ravine. You think they'll listen to reason?" Tobias shook his head. "I'm counting on pride, and Cyrus has got enough for every man behind him." Marybeth loaded the last rifle. "Then let's break it." They rode out to meet them. Not far, just to the edge of the last rise before the ranch yard. The light behind them, the scorched barn smoldering in the distance. They looked like phantoms against the pale fire of dawn. Cyrus pulled up, sneering. "Tobias, I thought maybe you got lost." "Only thing lost is your soul," Tobias replied. "You and your men have one chance. Turn back. Drop your guns. Let the law sort this." Cyrus laughed, spitting into the dust. "There ain't no law out here. Just fire and whoever's left standing." "Then let's see who stands," Marybeth said, raising her rifle. The wind fell silent, and then chaos exploded. The world cracked open with the sound of gunfire. Tobias and Marybeth ducked behind the boulders near the trail mouth, returning fire in disciplined bursts. The narrow pass worked to their advantage. 15 riders couldn't charge two abreast without tripping over each other. Horses reared. Riders fell. Dust and bullets filled the air like a summer hailstorm. Tobias spotted Cyrus midway up the trail, barking orders, eyes full of venom. "Still hiding behind a woman?" Cyrus shouted. Tobias didn't answer. Marybeth did. She stood, calm as dusk, and fired. The bullet whistled past Cyrus's cheek, nicking the side of his face. He reeled, cursed, and ducked behind his horse. Blood ran down his jaw. Not enough to kill, but plenty to humiliate. Tobias used the opening to signal Will, who had taken up position behind the west fence. The boy lit the pitchpots, one by one, until flames roared along the dry brush just behind the enemy's line of retreat. Cyrus's men turned at the sound of fire crackling behind them, trapped between bullets and a wall of heat. Panic set in. One rider tried to break through toward the ranch house. Tobias fired and dropped him clean. Another turned to flee and found flames instead. It was working. Cyrus's army was unraveling, but the man himself wouldn't yield. He stood up in his stirrups, eyes burning. "You think this ends with you, Tobias? With her? That paper don't mean a damn thing. I'll kill every witness from here to Abilene." Tobias stepped out from cover, rifle raised. "Then you're welcome to try." He fired. The shot struck Cyrus in the shoulder, spinning him out of the saddle. He hit the dirt with a scream, clutching the wound, blood soaking his coat. His horse bolted. His men froze. Some dropped their rifles. Others simply ran. The last stand of Dry Creek Ridge was over, but the reckoning hadn't yet begun. Tobias and Marybeth approached the fallen outlaw, smoke curling behind them. This wasn't vengeance. This was justice. Cyrus Maddox lay sprawled in the dust, blood soaking through his fine coat, hand clutching his wounded shoulder. His pistol was inches from his fingers, but Tobias kicked it away with a slow, deliberate motion. Marybeth stood over him, rifle still leveled, jaw tight with the rage of 10 burned towns and a husband's final breath. "You've got two choices," Tobias said, his voice low and steady. "Stand trial in Abilene, or bleed out in the dirt you tried to own." Cyrus coughed, tried to laugh, but it came out as a bitter, broken wheeze. "You really think you've won?" Tobias knelt beside him. "You're not the last of them, but you're the first to fall. And that's how change starts." Behind them, Will emerged from the smoke, helping 2 of Cyrus's men, wounded but surrendered. The boy's eyes held none of the innocence they once did, but something stronger now. Steel. Resolve. Tobias looked at Marybeth. "We'll ride to Abilene at sunup. You, me, and a wagon of evidence and prisoners." She nodded. "You think Cordwin will listen?" Tobias gave a grim smile. "He'll listen. And if he don't, he'll face what you faced here. Truth doesn't sleep, Marybeth. Not forever." As the flames behind them died down to embers and the dawn grew brighter, the children emerged from the cellar, blinking at the rising sun. The ranch, though battered, still stood. No lawman's badge had done this. No cavalry bugle had sounded. It was grit. It was family. It was a widow who wouldn't break, and a man who remembered what justice felt like. Tobias turned to Marybeth, tipping his hat. "You held the line." She looked him in the eye. "So did you." For the first time in years, Tobias Granger felt something stirred deep inside. Something like peace. And just maybe, something more. 3 weeks later, the courthouse in Abilene stood silent as Judge Franklin Cordwin read through the final dispatch. The letters, the testimonies, the bruised bodies of Cyrus's captured men, all of it laid bare before the law. Marybeth sat beside Tobias in the gallery, the children clean, fed, and still, as if holding their collective breath. When the judge finally looked up, he spoke with the gravity of a man who'd seen too many lies buried in open graves. "This court finds the evidence irrefutable. These documents will be sent to the Capitol by secured courier. And as for the accused, justice will be swift." Cyrus Maddox, bound and pale, sneered from behind iron bars. "This changes nothing," he spat. "Men like me always come back." Tobias stepped forward. "Maybe. But not here. Not again." Outside the courthouse, a crowd had gathered. Ranchers, farmers, townsfolk. Word had spread. About the widow who stood her ground. About the marshal who came out of retirement. About a ranch that didn't fall, even when fire knocked twice. They returned to Dry Creek Ridge a week later. The barn was gone, but the foundation was already being laid for a new one. Neighbors, once wary, now came with lumber, nails, and silent nods of respect. The Granger Ranch had become more than land. It had become legend. Tobias stood on the porch, watching the children chase chickens through the yard. Will was taller somehow. The little ones louder, livelier, free. Mary Beth stepped beside him, brushing her hand against his. "I never asked for a home like this," she said. "No one does," Tobias replied. "But when it finds you, you hold on." The wind carried their silence across the hills, and as the sun dipped low, casting golden fire across the plains, the man who once lived alone and the woman who once fled everything stood together. Not as strangers, not as survivors, but as something new, a family. And Dry Creek Ridge stood stronger than ever, proof that even in the hardest land, hope could take root and bloom.